Okay, so before we dive right into applying UI Router to our application, let's get a sense for how it works first. We'll take baby steps to see exactly what UI Router provides and how we interact with it. So the first thing we need to do is actually install it, and we can do so from the command line. Let's do npm install Angular UI Router. And once that installs, let's add the UI Router module to our Angular module definition. So right here within this array where we ask for other modules, let's call for UI Router. And UI Router gives us a couple providers that we'll need to make use of. And the first one we need to talk about is State Provider. And this is the provider that lets us set up various states for the app. So now let's define a couple test states. So let's go down here and we'll say State Provider. And we want a state. And let's call this first state, maybe just state 1. And then the second argument is an object where we set up some configuration. And so state 1 is the name of this state. And what we'll need to do is provide it a URL that it's recognized at. So the URL in this case, let's just call it state 1. And then we'll need to define what's shown at this state. So we can either give it a template right in line here, or we can give it an external template that's accessed by template URL. In this case, let's just do a quick inline template and maybe just an h1 with state 1. And we'll close that off. And that's it for the first state. Now, just to see how things work, let's do state again. This one will be state 2. And then the object to set up configuration, we'll do a URL of state 2 and a template that is much the same as here. I'm just going to copy and paste. This is going to be state 2. All right, so that is the configuration for our two test states. Now, how do we actually get the views that we've defined here in the template? How do we get those to show up on our page? The way we do that is with a directive called UI view. And so let's, for example, come into our index.html and maybe just below the toolbar here, what we'll do is we'll put in UI view. And just to note, you can do also a div with an attribute of UI view, and that would show you the view as well, but in this case, we'll just use the element. All right, so the way this works is that anywhere where we have a UI view showing up, that is the spot at which we will get our state coming through. All right, so let's save that and let's check it out in the browser. Let's refresh first. And then after our main URL, we have to provide a hash. And so this will allow us to get to different partials within our page. And you see here, I've already got state 1 coming up. So we'll go to state 1, and there it is. Our first state comes through. Let's try state 2 now. So state 2, and there's the second one coming through. Looks like I've got a big W in there. All right, so that's how we get our two different states, but how do we actually navigate without having to go explicitly to the URLs? Well, for that, we can use the UISref directive, which is what allows us to link to different partials. So for example, let's do md button. And in this button, we want to put a UISref. And let's point this to the name of whichever state we want to get to, which in this case, let's put state 1. And we'll say go to state 1. And then let's copy all of this, and we can just do the same thing for state 2. So go to state 2. And then here within the sref, we'll just point it to the name of the state, and that will be state 2. And so now if we refresh that, we've got our two buttons, and this one will take us to state 1, this one takes us to state 2. So what we see here is that we get the individual URI segments that we want for our states. And once again, we define those over here in our application's configuration. And we've got a name for each state, and then we've got the URL that it should be pointed to. And these don't have to be the same. So we could call this, say, 1, and we could call this one 2. These are just identifiers for the states. And then we'd have to come over here, and instead of pointing to state 1 here, it would be 1 and then 2. And then if we come over and refresh, everything is going to still work the same. We still get the same URI segments. Now this is useful because we can take it and, like we saw over here, we can paste it and we can send somebody to the specific state we wanted them to get to. So that means we could then send them to state 2 if we wanted to. So we just give them this link instead and they would get to state 2. So UI Router provides this concept of nested states. And what that means is that if we wanted to maybe go deeper into a sub-state of this state 2 partial, we could do that by using another UI view directive. And the spot where we would put this UI view directive would be here within the template. So let's just set something up to mock it out and test it. So let's maybe provide an MD button here again, and let's call this a UI sref of 2 more. And this is kind of just a silly name to provide a way to get to this nested state. So then we'll say go to nested state, and then we'll end that button. All right, so that looks pretty ugly because it's all in line, but hopefully you get the gist of it. And so then we can come down here and set up another state. And so this one, let's call it 2.more, just to line up here with the UI sref that we've given it. And so our configuration then will look like this. We'll say we want the URL to be more. And what's going to happen is this more segment will be placed right after this state 2 segment. So we just call it more like that. And so then for the template, we can just maybe give it a p tag and say this is the deeper state. All right, so let's see how this works out. We'll save this and then let's go over to the browser and refresh. And here within state 2, we've got this button that says go to a nested state. So if we click that, we see we've got our message. This is the deeper state. And here in the URL bar, we've gotten to that more segment. So this is the way that UI Router gives us the ability to nest various states together and then to build up that URI segment so that this can be accessed if we send somebody this link. So now with this knowledge of UI Router in place, let's go ahead and apply it to our app.